Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night. That is the first Sunday, I should say, of every month. You get to ask questions of me by clicking on the link, I guess that is in the chat window, and by doing that, that allows me a little bit of time to prepare, and then I can answer any and all of your questions. And we got a couple of cracking questions for this month. But before I do, wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what's happening around our community in the next month or so. So for those of you who have not been coming to our meetups on a regular basis, and I'll just give you the link for that, but if you've not been coming to our meetups on a regular basis, we are about to turn 10 years of age. So not this month, but next month we are going to be 10 years of age. And so what we're trying to do is we are trying to cram the room full of people, because for those of you who don't know me, I like to party. So I want to make sure that this is a rockin' show. And after 10 years of doing this, I think it is absolutely time to celebrate. And we've got a massive amount of promos and I guess giveaways, both at the event, leading up to the event, and prior to the event. We are actually going to be celebrating for the entire year. So firstly, if you register to come to the event, you come to the physical event in your state, and we run these in 3 states: Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. If you physically attend, you will be sent an email, and that email will allow you to invite a friend for free. So bring a friend for free. So please make sure that you actually do that. We want to get the room absolutely rocking, I guess, when it comes to our birthday show, and I guess all the lead up and post, we're celebrating for the entire year. Please make sure you do that. Now, that said, I promised they've got a set of cracking questions, and so I'm going to give you, I guess, a little bit of a rundown. We've got a question here from Paul Russo. Paul says, do you use the QuickFiso spreadsheet for your own projects? And if so, do your students also use it? Can it be used for a wide range of projects, or is it tailored towards a specific strategy? So firstly, what I might do is just to give everyone some insight. QuickFiso is a feasibility spreadsheet that I have developed that follows my methodology for, I guess, doing a 3-stage FISO. So firstly, you want to be able to do a quick and dirty FISO to be able to do an order of magnitude to say, should I be wasting my time on this? It uses a whole bunch of built-in price points, plus you get to build some standard strategies yourself. And within minutes, you should be able to say, look, am I wasting my time on this site? Then it allows you to do a stage 2 analysis, and that is a detailed analysis where you can actually go a little bit deeper dive into the process. And then thirdly, you get to do, I guess, the 3rd stage, which is your full due diligence process. Now, because I built this tool for me and following my own methodology, absolutely, Paul, I use it for all of my own projects. It is perfect for anything that's got to do with subdivisions, townhouses, or apartment complexes that might be duplexes, something like that. It works really, really well if and only if it's garbage in, garbage out, if you know what your inputs are, because the spreadsheet is not the answer, my friend. The answer is actually, can you actually do your site assessment correctly? Can you do your sales assessment correctly? Those sorts of things. But when you do, then QuickFiso will actually help you to do that super, super fast. Now, for those of you who don't know about QuickFiso, you can actually have a look at it at the link below and go and check that out. As I said, it follows my methodology. Where it's perfect for, as I said, is the small scale projects. I'm going to say anything that is 20 townhouses and below, it works fantastically for. As you start to get something bigger than that, it will actually do the job, no problem at all. However, you're probably starting to be more in the more professional realm when you're starting to go into those categories. And so you'll probably find that your financier and or your I guess quantity surveyor, that sort of thing, they're going to want to be looking at inputs that they're a little bit more familiar with, and that's where you're going to go to a fee study or something along those lines. But you don't have to do that. It just tends to be what we see people transition, I guess, going through that process. So now that that's the case, yes, I absolutely use it for my own projects, and you can use it for yours as well, mate. It is currently on special for $150. It's dirt cheap. lifetime access. And the other thing is that we're actually doing a whole bunch of updates to that Quick Visa spreadsheet. And I'm going to say in the next 6 weeks, we'll be doing a major release update with a whole bunch of new features that I can't wait to announce. But some of those are going to be able to do, I guess, stress testing of your projects to say, well, what happens if the market goes down and the build costs go up? And it will actually draw that out in a little bit of a matrix. You can actually see at what point it really actually breaks. And so really, really quickly, that's going to help you with some really insight. Plus, we've got a whole bunch of extra features in that we're putting into it. Aren't yet there, but they're going to be there very soon. That will actually allow you, I guess, a lot more creative finance solutions in the platform natively. So watch out for that, Paul. And if you already are using the product, for anyone who has ever purchased it ever, it is free upgrades for life. So when that new version comes out, we'll send you an email and let you know, so you can actually download the greatest version. That's the latest version, I should say. Next question is from Andrew. Andrew says, how much coin do you actually need to start as a deal finder? I'm a bit of a doubter when I'm told little to no money down would be required. Please clarify. Thank you. So Andrew, there's a couple of answers here, mate, and I guess it really depends on what state that you're in, but and how you're actually acquiring the deal. Okay. However, being a deal finder itself, you're not actually putting any deposits in, you're not actually funding the project, you're not putting any cash in yourself. What you're doing is you're investing your cash and your time into yourself to actually learn the skills to actually go out and actually find the deal. So the money that you're going to need is, how do I do self-education with yourself? How do you do letterbox drops and things like that? That's the money that will be required. That's hard cash. That's absolutely required. Now, depending upon how you are actually finding the site and which particular state you're in, it's different legislation for each state. It might be that you actually will require a real estate agent's license. You may need to invest in that in order to do that. If, however, you are acquiring the site under something like an option agreement, then you might not need to have that real estate agent's license. I guess what people are paying you for effectively is the fact that you've educated yourself, that you've put your time, your effort, your skills, and you've actually found the deal for someone else. So you've solved someone else's problem, what you actually get paid for. So if you can do that, there's good money to be made in deal finding. Typically, deal finding fee, I guess, has two very distinct ways of actually, earning an outcome from it. So one of them would be a percentage of the purchase price of the property, and that is, I'm just going to give you an indicative. So typically what we see is about 2 or 2.2% on whether or not you're required to see. So 2 or 2.2% for the purchase price of the property. Or if you get it under an option agreement, then what value are you actually adding to that process? So maybe you might use the time while it's under to add a development approval uplift to that. What you've got to make sure then, there's no upper limit if you can actually do that. Where it becomes, I guess, a limit is you've got to leave enough money on the table for the next guy who's actually going to take it off your hands. So if you leave enough money on the table that they're going to do that, whatever uplift you create is really the, I guess, margin that you're actually able to grab. It can be done with little to no money other than, I guess, the time and effort to invest in yourself and the education that you're going to put into yourself. Now, there's lots of ways to educate yourself. You can shadow others. You can turn up to our meetups and I guess go back and watch, a whole bunch of back catalogs. You can go to educators like myself and others who will actually teach you. But my guiding light to you, Andrew, is to make sure that you pick your one strategy. And when you pick their one strategy, you get really, really good on that. There's a couple of insights, say, with regards to deal finding. There's are you going to look for something for you and then pass on to others everything that does not suit you? That's one approach. Or are you going to have other people tell you their needs and you're going to go shopping for them? Now, my candor on that would be you want to make sure that you're looking after yourself, more priority. And then if you find a deal, you might go to all the effort of proving that it's developable, and then proving that it's then profitable, negotiating the terms on that, and then you find out that the terms that wants doesn't suit your circumstance. That's a fantastic opportunity to then flip that on for a finder's fee. Okay. But if you're really creative with your negotiation skills, you've proven it's developable, you've proven it's profitable, then when you start to negotiate, you might negotiate some really creative finance solutions. You might have a delayed settlement with early access. You might negotiate an option contract. You might negotiate a joint venture with the landowner, all sorts of things like that. These are the no and low money down type approaches that are available. If you negotiate that at vendor's needs, then you might be able to step into that shoes. And then at that point, you're not really deal finding anymore. You're actually have the ability to run the deal. Now, at that point, the money that you need is the liquid cash to run the deal, depending upon how you've negotiated that now, depending upon, I guess, the circumstances of the vendor and the equity that's actually in the deal. So lots of ways to actually be creative. But to answer your direct question, do you need money to start being a deal finder? Only to educate in yourself, mate. And please make sure you put a lot of time and effort into that part of the process, because what you're going to find is as you try to offload your deals to someone else, if you've not put the effort in, you're going to get a lot of people rejecting you very, very fast. Make sure you get feedback on that process along the way to say, why are you rejecting it? Let me learn so you can absolutely self-learn, but it's going to take a little bit long to do that. Anyway, hope that helps, Andrew. Next question is from Daniel. So Daniel says, I'm negotiating a contract with a builder for a duplex project. Well done, mate. Builder asks for a rise and fall in the contract. Under the situation, I prefer a fixed price contract. Mate, we pretty much all do. Maybe I can accommodate a clause that allows a certain percentage of price increase, say 2 to 3%, but I know the maximum price I would pay. What's your thoughts in this scenario to mitigate the price rise, increase, I guess, minimize my risk economy? Daniel, so firstly, I've got to be really careful here because what you're asking for is legal advice, so I can't give you legal advice here. What I can say is every state deals with this slightly differently, because some states it's actually illegal to have a rise and fall clause. So you want to make sure that you check in with your solicitor to see whether or not the state that you were in that is actually legal. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is I would be very careful, assuming that it is legal, I'd be very careful to not just have a blanket rise and fall clause, but rather fixed price everything that actually can be fixed price. Okay, so things like your taps, things like your tiles, things like your paint, there's a lot of things inside your build that actually can be fixed price. Now, right now, there's really three things that are, I guess, getting hit the most with price rises. So timber, steel, and concrete. They're the three that are being hit the hardest. And so I would be trying to have, if you can have this rise and fall clause in your particular state, I'd be trying to minimize it just to those three in particular. And more specifically, I'd be getting a quantity surveyor to actually measure exactly how much concrete, how much timber, how much steel is actually required in your particular project, and estimating what they believe should be fair and reasonable price right here, right now. That way you've got a baseline, and then if you have a rise and fall clause, then you've got that baseline to be able to measure that from, and you want to have the open book policy with the builder on that element. And then he claims a rise and fall clause, make sure the quantity surveyor also is signing off on the fact that the quantities that he's claiming are actually also part of that. Now, what I would say here is one that most people probably won't pick up, and that is the builder will always have a margin on the purchase of the material. So if the cost of the material goes up, the builder's percentage has stayed the same, but the builder actually gets more cash in their pocket. Now, that's probably not appropriate with a rise and fall clause. So you might want to negotiate on the elements. Look, he gets paid a certain amount irrespective of the price. And if the price goes up and down, you understand because it's not the builder's fault. but you don't think that he should profiteer from that process either. So that's kind of my candor on that, mate. I would be very, very cautious. Make sure that you check in with your solicitor. Everyone signing a building contract should always be using a building and construction lawyer anyway. So please make sure that you actually do that, that they are very aware of what is and isn't legally available in your particular state. So hoping that that one helps there. Next one, Grace. Grace has got a couple of questions. So Grace says, "Hi Rob, thanks for diligently hosting the broadcast every week." You're more than welcome, Grace. Here our plan is to do a duplex of development, sell one and live in the other for 12 months, so that it's not mine, so we don't pay capital gains tax when selling our owner occupied home. So that's the background, and I've got some words of caution that I want to say on that, and to say you want to make sure that you get some really sound account advice as to whether or not that's something that you can actually do. I've seen many instances where people have attempted to do that and been stung really hard because the ATO looks at your intent. Okay, so if your intent is that you're going to flick it, then you aren't really using it in place of residence. So you want to make sure that you've got your accountant locked in, that what you're trying to do is actually legal and legit. So that's the first things first. The other thing is, long term, if you're going to go on and do many projects, the OTO has the ability to look back at previous transactions, and if they see you doing 2 or 3 other projects in time, they will look back and say, well, why would that first project have been any different? And so you may have the tripwire that you're putting in place there that's going to expose you. So please make sure that you get some really sound advice on that. That said, your question, how do I fund the project? Is it a good idea to purchase the site under our own names with our 20% deposit and borrow 80% from the bank? Afterwards, we apply for the plan of development. Again, what you're trying to ask for here is, Grace, is actual legal advice. I've got to be very careful. I cannot give you legal and accounting advice. What I can tell you is that property development is a risky game. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to expose yourself from a legal perspective from any ongoing warranty obligations that might sit with the property. So, for example, when you construct, you're going to have to provide, depending upon where you're in, anywhere from 4 to 6 years worth of warranty on the building itself. And so you want to be very cautious that whilst we believe that it's the builder who's responsible, the ultimate purchaser comes to us and makes the claim against us, and then we go to the builder in order to make the claim against the builder. So you're in the middle of a fight between the vendor and the builder, and you're going to have to pay the legal battle against the vendor and the legal battle against the builder. And so you want to be really cautious that you don't want to actually get in the middle of that. So I'm not sure that doing this in your own name is a sensible idea if that is going to be the case. Again, make sure that you get some really sound, in this instance, legal advice with regards to your asset protection. Now, here's the challenge. You're going to have your accountant giving you taxation advice and your solicitor giving you legal advice, and the two of them might not be the same advice. And so you've got to work out which of those two is actually the outcome that you want to do, or ideally get the two of them in the room together and say, look, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, and you might have to come up with a hybrid solution. That hybrid solution might involve a couple of entities that are set up in a very particular way, what they call cascading entities, so that one entity might be doing the development, another entity might be doing the property holding, all sorts of things like that, okay? So lots of different ways to actually structure this to asset protect you and tax minimize you, okay? They're the two outcomes that you're actually looking for. Myself, personally, I don't think that doing it in your own name is a sensible thing for your asset protection. That's probably the first thing. And I would give you caution with regards to doing it in your own name and trying to claim that exemption if you're going to make a habit of this, or if you know upfront that your intention is to flick it in 12 months' time. as I said, the ATO are very much all about intent. So please get your accounting and legal advice there. Question number 2 from Grace is an extension on that. So once the development approval is approved, we can then apply for a construction loan at the stage we borrow under a commercial loan without the need for serviceability. Absolutely, that is definitely possible. So I guess if I break it down, what you're trying to do is you're wanting to get a residential loan in order to acquire the site in the first place, get all your relevant development approvals in place, convert over to commercial loan. It's actually quite common in going through the process. Some of the things to be mindful of in doing that is that if you're going for a residential loan, the residential bank is looking for a 20 to 30 year loan period in order to purchase off you. And so they're not necessarily going to look favorably on the fact that you're trying to development. My guidance would be, if you're trying to do a smaller project like this, and especially if you're intending to genuinely live here, and I'd say genuinely live here, there is no reason why you couldn't actually get the construction loan from the residential bank to say, look, my intention is to actually genuinely live here long term, because it actually would potentially qualify for that. And whilst commercial loans are fantastic when you're starting to scale, there's a threshold where residential makes sense, and there's a threshold where commercial makes sense. And when you're just doing a duplex, you're in the threshold of, hey, I might be able to fund this under residential terms. Okay. Now, as I said, residential loans are looking for a 20 or 30 year loan period, and because of that, you need to be able to demonstrate to the bank your intention to service the loan for 20 or 30 years. And that you're actually going to be keeping the stock at the end. So you might have to do things like get rental appraisals on the finished product. I guess whether or not you are telling them that you're actually going to sell or otherwise, you need to disclose that. You might say to them, look, our intention is to keep this as a PPR. Yes, we're going to develop it, but we're going to sell one down in order to reduce our debt. So that you're very clear and you're very upfront in actually doing that. My guidance would be, go to a loan broker, I guess, discuss your particular circumstances and allow them to navigate which banks that might be able to do that on your behalf, okay? Because not every bank is going to be, I guess, understanding or flexible with regards to the fact that you want to sell one down when they're looking at that 20 or 30 year loan period. But believe that it is actually genuinely possible in order to do that. So the last question, how would you finance this project from start to finish? I think I've actually answered that one. So so hope that helps, Grace. No problem at all. Now I'm whipping through these questions, folks. I've only got one. I thought we'd take a little bit longer, but anyway, last one is from Annie. Annie says, hi, Rob. I would like to hire the team from handover.com that did a presentation with you to inspect my construction during the 5 stages of construction. I'm afraid to talk about this to my builder. Can he refuse the 5 inspections by building inspectors hired by me? If yes, how can I force the builder? Now, first things first, Annie, I would say you don't want to force you anything, because that instantly creates, I guess, bad blood and bad animosity, okay? Instead, I would be saying to them, look, I want an independent person to be able to sign off on each in each instance. Now, I think what you've got here is a slight misunderstanding as to what some of those inspections would be from someone like handovers.com. So handovers.com would deal with the finished product. Once you actually get occupational certificate and they're handing the property over to you, they would actually come in and do the defects check with regards to I guess the finished product that's sitting there. And they've got a very, very comprehensive check process that they go through to actually find all the dings, all the scratches, all the taps that aren't working and the like, and they'll give you a very, very comprehensive list. It's actually really common for builders to actually have that into their clause that someone like that is actually going to come by. As a matter of fact, most builders prefer that because it is an independent person who actually understands, I guess, what it is that is legally able to be claimed as a defect. Now, it's really understand that, and there are design and standards guides that you can actually look up for your state. But as an example, you might have a small dent in the wall that when it's viewed at a very particular angle, the sunlight reflects off of it and the dent stands out. However, when you stand immediately in front of it from a certain specific distance, you can't see that dent because the sunlight is not reflecting off that angle. Now, in that instance, that is depending upon the state you're in and the distance that you're standing and how the size of the dent and all those sorts of things. In that instance, that might not technically be a defect. And so builders don't like the fact unqualified people like ourselves go in and we see the dent at that funny angle. And so we claim that it's a fault, and then the builder starts getting into an argument saying that's not the standards. So they prefer someone like handovers.com to come in who understand the standards and say, look, we can actually genuinely see that this is a legitimate thing. Okay, so you would have handovers.com in at the end of the process. I think what you're asking for is someone to actually be checking as you go. Now, the challenge here, Annie, is that there's a couple of things that are at play here. So there are different things to be checking for. So are they building to building standards is one thing, and are they building to quality standards is something else. So the building standards, you would have your building certifier come in and actually sign that off. Now, depending upon the state that you're in, that might also be called a building surveyor. They're going to come in and make sure that the building standard actually meets the National Construction Code, that everything is actually, I guess, bolted down correctly and braced correctly, and all those sorts of need to actually happen. Okay, but having said that, they're not really going to care if the wall is a little bit wobbly. What they're going to care about is the wall going to stand up. Okay, so there's the difference is building to a standard, and then the other one is building to a quality. So the handovers.com will assess the quality. They're going to assess that at the end when it's finished. Now, it's difficult to assess the quality as you're going because the builder can rightly claim, hey, it's not finished. You can't assess me on a defect for something that I'm still building, which is a fair and valid claim. So you would likely have, I guess, the building surveyor or building certified, depending on the state that you're in, and the terminology they use, to come in and actually check the standards. You would also potentially have a quantity surveyor, different skill set. Quantity surveyor come in and assess the amount of materials that have actually been used in order to get to that. So how much concrete did they use? How much timber they use? How many nails did they use? Because when a claim is made to say, hey, we're 15% complete, then the quantity surveyor can actually measure to say that you are 15% materials have actually been consumed, and they can actually say, yes, that's a fair and valid claim. Builders are very, very familiar with both of those processes, and in most instances, you're not going to have much of a problem in actually having that conversation. But it is about having a conversation. You need to actually sit down with the builder and say, look, I don't want to get into technical conversations with you and have my opinion cloud the situation, but rather what I'd rather do is pay for someone who is an expert in their field, who's studied, knows exactly what they are, to come in as an independent arbitrator to say, look, this is the right amount of materials, this is the right standard that you've actually built to, and this is the right quality that I actually paid for. They're the three things that you really want to be measuring against, okay? And they're going to be understanding of that. Now, if they're not understanding, then the question is that the right kind of builder that you're actually wanting? The bigger the project, the more the builders are much more used to those sorts of checks coming as I guess, a more regular basis. The smaller the project, sometimes I guess the clients that they have don't have that level of insistence. They're a little bit more of a typical homeowner, so they're a little bit less, I guess, diligent in the process. And what they're really caring about is, hey, just the quality of the finish. So that's kind of, excuse me, that's kind of my read on how that goes, Annie. Have the conversation with them. Don't force them. Instead, have a discussion with them. That is super important. Very important that you actually raise it before the contract is actually built, to say that you want to put these checks and balances in place. so that everyone is looked after. You want to make sure that the builder is actually paid on time for what they are actually. You want to make sure that you're paying for something that has actually been built, and you want to make sure that the standards are actually there along the way. Now, a couple of little things, little tips and tricks that I tend to do in going through that process. I try to negotiate into the build contract to say at the, I guess the OC that issued, I will hold back 5% of the funds until that handovers type document is actually handed over, and then they've got 2 weeks to remedy all of those defects, and then I will pay the final payment at that point. I like to do that because if you don't, you've actually paid the final payment and those defects are still in place. There's no incentive for the builder to actually come back at this point. Now, that's a much harder conversation, and not every builder is actually going to be, I guess, as accommodating. But if they're a quality builder, they're actually going to understand, hey, you're trying to do this to rip them off. You're actually less hassle for them. They want to get it over and done with. So, you know, I've been able to successfully negotiate that many, many times. And so I'm quietly comfortable that you should be able to do the same as well. Anyway, that appears to be the last of our questions. So this has been a super quick, I guess, session today. So if you have any questions for yourselves next time, please make sure that you actually click on the link. See if I can actually find there's the Open Mic Night link. So if you want to click on that link, submit your questions for next month. That gives me a little bit of time to do my homework and research and all of those sorts of things. So make sure you do that. Remember, we're coming up to our 10th birthday. Really want to see everybody at our 10th birthday event and ongoing. We've got Bring a Friend for free, and we've also got the chance to win 50 holidays. Okay, 50 holidays, 50. Just through, I guess, attending our events for, I guess, the 10th year that we're in existence. So please come down, folks. We cannot wait to help you on your development journey. Until then, folks, I'm going to say bye for now.